Candide by Voltaire. Chapter 4. How Candide found his old master Pangloss, and what happened to them. Candide, yet more moved with compassion than with horror, gave to this shocking beggar the 2 florins which he had received from the honest Anabaptist James. The spectre looked at him very earnestly, dropped a few tears, and fell upon his neck. Candide recoiled in disgust. "Alas," said one wretch to the other, "do you no longer know your dear Pangloss?"
"What do I hear? You, my dear master? You in this terrible plight? What misfortune has happened to you? Why are you no longer in the most magnificent of castles? What has become of Miss Cunegonde, the pearl of girls and nature's masterpiece?" "I am so weak that I cannot stand," said Pangloss, upon which Candide carried him to the Anabaptist's stable, and gave him a crust of bread. As soon as Pangloss had refreshed himself a little, "Well," said Candide, "Cunegonde?" "She is dead," replied the other. Candide fainted at this word. His friend recalled his senses with a little bad vinegar, which he found by chance in the stable. Candide reopened his eyes. "Cunegonde is dead. Ah, best of worlds, where art thou? But of what illness did she die? Was it not for grief upon seeing her father kick me out of his magnificent castle?" "No," said Pangloss. "She was ripped open by the Bulgarian soldiers. After having been violated by many, they broke the Baron's head for attempting to defend her. My lady, her mother, was cut in pieces. My poor pupil was served just in the same manner as his sister. But as for the castle, they have not left one stone upon another, not a barn, not a sheep, nor a duck, nor a tree. But we have had our revenge, for the Abares have done the very same thing to a neighboring barony which belonged to a Bulgarian lord." At this discourse Candide fainted again, but coming to himself, and having said all that it became him to say, inquired into the cause and effect, as well as into the sufficient reason that had reduced Pangloss to so miserable a plight. "Alas," said the other, "it was love. Love, the comfort of the human species, the preserver of the universe, the soul of all sensible things. Love, tender love." "Alas," said Candide, "I know this love, that sovereign of hearts, that soul of our souls, yet it never cost me more than a kiss and 20 kicks on the backside. How could this beautiful cause produce in you an effect so abominable?" Pangloss made answer in these terms. "Oh, my dear Candide, you remember Paquette, that pretty wench who waited on our noble Baroness? In her arms I tasted the delights of paradise, which produced in me those hell torments with which you see me devoured. She was infected with them. She is perhaps dead of them. This present Paquette received of a learned grey friar, who had traced it to its source. He had had it of an old countess, who had received it from a cavalry captain, who owed it to a marchioness, who took it from a page, who had received it from a Jesuit, who, when a novice, had it in a direct line from one of the companions of Christopher Columbus. For my part, I shall give it to nobody. I am dying." "Oh, Pangloss," cried Candide, "what a strange genealogy! Is not the devil the original stock of it?" "Not at all," replied this great man. "It was a thing unavoidable, a necessary ingredient in the best of worlds. For if Columbus had not in an island of America caught this disease, which contaminates the source of life, frequently even hinders generation, and which is evidently opposed to the great end of nature, we should have neither chocolate nor cochineal. We are to observe that upon our continent this distemper is like religious controversy, confined to a particular spot. The Turks, the Indians, the Persians, the Chinese, the Siamese, the Japanese know nothing of it. But there is a sufficient reason for believing that they will know it in their turn in a few centuries. In the meantime, it has made marvelous progress among us, especially in those great armies composed of honest, well-disciplined hirelings who decide the destiny of states. For we may safely affirm that when an army of 30,000 men fights another of an equal number, there are about 20,000 of them poxed on each side.
"Well, this is wonderful," said Candide, "but you must get cured."
"Alas, how can I?" said Pangloss. "I have not a farthing, my friend, and all over the globe there is no letting of blood or taking a glister without paying, or somebody paying for you."
These last words determined Candide. He went and flung himself at the feet of the charitable Anabaptist James, and gave him so touching a picture of the state to which his friend was reduced that the good man did not scruple to take Dr. Pangloss into his house, and had him cured at his expense. In the cure Pangloss lost only an eye and an ear. He wrote well and knew arithmetic perfectly. The Anabaptist James made him his bookkeeper. At the end of 2 months, being obliged to go to Lisbon about some mercantile affairs, he took the 2 philosophers with him in his ship. Pangloss explained to him how everything was so constituted that it could not be better. James was not of this opinion. "It is more likely," said he, "mankind have a little corrupted nature, for they were not born wolves, and they have become wolves. God has given them neither cannon of 24-pounders nor bayonets, and yet they have made cannon and bayonets to destroy one another. Into this account I might throw not only bankrupts, but justice, which seizes on the effects of bankrupts to cheat the creditors." "All this was indispensable," replied the one-eyed doctor, "for private misfortunes make the general good, so that the more private misfortunes there are, the greater is the general good." While he reasoned, the sky darkened, the winds blew from the 4 quarters, and the ship was assailed by a most terrible tempest within sight of the port of Lisbon. End Chapter 4. Chapter 5. Tempest, Shipwreck, Earthquake, and What Became of Dr. Pangloss, Candide, and James the Anabaptist. Half dead of that inconceivable anguish which the rolling of a ship produces, 1/2 of the passengers were not even sensible of the danger. The other half shrieked and prayed. The sheets were rent, the masts broken, the vessel gaped. Work who would, no one heard, no one commanded. The Anabaptist, being upon deck, bore a hand, when a brutish sailor struck him roughly and laid him sprawling, but with the violence of the blow he himself tumbled head foremost overboard, and stuck upon a piece of the broken mast. Honest James ran to his assistance, hauled him up, and from the effort he made was precipitated into the sea in sight of the sailor, who left him to perish, without deigning to look at him. Candide drew near and saw his benefactor, who rose above the water one moment and was then swallowed up forever. He was just going to jump after him, but was prevented by the philosopher Pangloss, who demonstrated to him that the Bay of Lisbon had been made on purpose for the Anabaptist to be drowned. While he was proving this a priori, the ship foundered. All perished except Pangloss, Candide, and that brutal sailor who had drowned the good Anabaptist. The villain swam safely to the shore, while Pangloss and Candide were borne thither upon a plank. As soon as they recovered themselves a little, they walked towards Lisbon. They had some money left, with which they hoped to save themselves from starving after they had escaped drowning. Scarcely had they reached the city, lamenting the death of their benefactor, when they felt the earth tremble under their feet. The sea swelled and foamed in the harbor, and beat to pieces the vessels riding at anchor. Whirlwinds of fire and ashes covered the streets and public places. Houses fell, roofs were flung upon the pavements, and the pavements were scattered. 30,000 inhabitants of all ages and sexes were crushed under the ruins. The sailor, whistling and swearing, said there was booty to be gained here. "What can be the sufficient reason of this phenomenon?" said Pangloss.
"This is the last day," cried
Candide. The sailor ran among the ruins, facing death to find money. Finding it, he took it, got drunk, and having slept himself sober, purchased the favors of the first good-natured wench whom he met on the ruins of the destroyed houses, and in the midst of the dying and the dead. Pangloss pulled him by the sleeve. "My friend," he said, "this is not right. You sin against the universal reason. You choose your time badly." "Blood and fury," answered the other. "I am a sailor and born in Batavia. 4 times have I trampled upon the crucifix in 4 voyages to Japan. A fig for thy universal reason." Some falling stones had wounded Candide. He lay stretched in the street, covered with rubbish.
"Alas," he said to Pangloss, "get me a little wine and oil. I am dying."
"This concussion of the earth is no new thing," answered Pangloss. "The city of Lima in America experienced the same convulsions last year. The same cause, the same effects. There is certainly a train of sulphur underground from Lima to Lisbon."
"Nothing more probable," said Candide. "But for the love of God, a little oil and wine."
"How probable?" replied the philosopher. "I maintain that the point is capable of being demonstrated." Candide fainted away, and Pangloss fetched him some water from a neighboring fountain. The following day they rummaged among the ruins and found provisions with which they repaired their exhausted strength. After this they joined with others in relieving those inhabitants who had escaped death. Some, whom they had succored, gave them as good a dinner as they could in such disastrous circumstances. True, the repast was mournful, and the company moistened their bread with tears. But Pangloss consoled them, assuring them that things could not be otherwise. "For," he said, "all that is for the best. If there is a volcano at Lisbon, it cannot be elsewhere. It is impossible that things should be other than they are, for everything is right." A little man dressed in black, familiar of the Inquisition, who sat by him, politely took up his word and said, "Apparently, then, sir, you do not believe in original sin. For if all is for the best, there has been neither fall nor punishment." "I humbly ask your Excellency's pardon," answered Pangloss, still more politely, "for the fall and curse of man necessarily entered into the system of the best of worlds." "Sir," said the familiar, "you do not then believe in liberty?" "Your Excellency will excuse me," said Pangloss. "Liberty is consistent with absolute necessity, for it was necessary we should be free. For, in short, the determinate will—" Pangloss was in the middle of his sentence when the familiar beckoned to his footman, who gave him a glass of wine from Porto or Oporto. Chapter 5. Chapter 6. How the Portuguese made a beautiful auto-da-fe to prevent any further earthquakes, and how Candide was publicly whipped. After the earthquake had destroyed 3/4 of Lisbon, the sages of that country could think of no means more effectual to prevent utter ruin than to give the people a beautiful auto-da-fe, for it had been decided by the University of Coimbra that the burning of a few people alive by a slow fire, and with great ceremony, is an infallible secret to hinder the earth from quaking. In consequence hereof, they had seized on a Biscayner convicted of having married his godmother, and on 2 Portuguese for rejecting the bacon which larded a chicken they were eating. After dinner they came and secured Dr. Pangloss and his disciple Candide, the one for speaking his mind, the other for having listened with an air of approbation. They were conducted to separate apartments, extremely cold, as they were never incommoded by the sun. 8 days after, they were dressed in sanbenitos, and their heads ornamented with paper mitres. The mitre and sanbenito belonging to Candide were painted with reversed flames, and with devils that had neither tails nor claws. But Pangloss's devils had claws and tails, and the flames were upright. They marched in procession thus habited, and heard a very pathetic sermon, followed by fine church music. Candide was whipped in cadence while they were singing. The Biscayner and the 2 men who had refused to eat bacon were burnt, and Pangloss was hanged, though that was not the custom. The same day the earth sustained a most violent concussion. Candide, terrified, amazed, desperate, all bloody, all palpitating, said to himself, "If this is the best of possible worlds, what then are the others? Well, if I had been only whipped, I could put up with it, for I experienced that among the Bulgarians. But, oh, my dear Pangloss, thou greatest of philosophers, that I should have seen you hanged, without knowing for what! Oh, my dear Anabaptist, thou best of men, that thou shouldst have been drowned in the very harbor! Oh, Miss Cunegonde, thou pearl of girls, that thou shouldst have had thy belly ripped open." Thus he was musing, scarce able to stand, preached at, whipped, absolved, and blessed, when an old woman accosted him, saying,
"My son, take courage and follow me."
End chapter 6.